Hey, what's up, and welcome to this episode of Rainer on Leadership podcast for leadership, not only in the church, but in any sphere. My name is Josh.
My name is Sam, and I am just so hoping that Josh learned something on this episode, because you've already learned something in the pre-show.
Well, I asked a question that revealed ignorance. I'm not sure I learned it yet. I got an answer, and I'm going to process it, but yes. I always want to learn something, Sam, and I do frequently learn things from you and our guest.
Listen, I'm just happy we have Chad Brooks, the Reverend Chad Brooks, on today's episode, and he's here to talk about something that we typically don't get to talk about.
What's that?
Mainline denominations.
Yeah, I know.
Chad,
but what is that?
I know, that was what we were talking about in the pre-show. I love that Josh was like, what's a mainline? What is a mainline?
I don't understand. But it comes from the days of like when baseball was a real sport in our country. So I understand why I'm not fully in it. Chad, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, guys.
Yeah, we're glad you're here.
So Chad's from Louisiana. He works for the conference there. His official title is statistical guru and data nerd. Did I get that right?
That's what it works out to be.
Did we say United Methodist? Because I don't think you said the conference there, the Conference of the United Methodist.
Hey, right. Listen, yeah, we were all talking beforehand, and we just hit record. So yes,
which is Mainline, by the way.
The United Methodist Church is a mainline church. Yes,
that's good to know.
And you know, if there's any group in the U.S. that has had potentially more controversy surrounding them than the SBC, which is what Josh and I are, it's arguably. You could make the argument for the UMC, Chad.
I'm always glad, like when the annual meeting of the SPC is going on, because it kind of like can cloud whatever might happen in our neck of the woods for a couple of weeks.
The Baptists are giving us cover. Everybody, post your opinion. Post your opinion. By the way, I'd like to go on record. I'm a Texas Baptist first. All right, so the Southern Baptist thing, that's there, but I'm a Texas Baptist.
Yeah, we'd probably say the same thing. We'd say the same thing about Florida. We'd be Florida Baptist first. But honestly, isn't that kind of the way it's supposed to be?
It is. But we are not mainline, by the way. Texas Baptist, we are just Lone Star.
You're Texas is what you
are. We're just Texas. We didn't know there was other. All right, we need to talk about our sponsor so we can talk about these amazing questions we have here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Chad because he's got some awesome insight for us. But first, I want to tell you about Southern Seminary. I graduated from Southern. I've got a long history there. Love the institution, and I am incredibly honored that they are a sponsor of today's episode. You know, they're known for their theological depth. They're known for the campus that they have that's absolutely beautiful. They're known for several things over the course of the last many years, including some of the best professors on the planet. But did you know that they've got a really practical Doctor of Ministry program, and you should go check it out. I really like this program, and I think you should give it a look. Go to sbts.edu/solutions. Again, sbts.edu/solutions. If you got questions, if you have problems in your church, and you want to work through them in an academic setting, but also a very practical setting, you should go to Southern Seminary. sbts.edu/solutions. Give them a quick look. Go right now. If you're like in front of your computer listening, just put it up in the window, in another window while you listen to Josh and me and Chad talk about whatever.
Chad, I don't know how it is in your neck of the woods, but it seems that everywhere we're looking around, churches are in decline. I think a lot of our members are that way. Is this something that you're seeing as well in your part of the country?
I would say that we have not dodged that bullet. And we've got decline in our own unique way, but I think everybody feels just the push of what has happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Wow. Yeah. So the idea here, if you haven't picked this up already, but Sam, the mainline denominations, as well as most denominations, are in decline, and it's going to, regardless if you're a part of these other denominations, sometimes I can hear people say, we're not Baptist. Why do I need to care what's going on with the Southern Baptist Convention? We're not United Methodist. Just those two alone carry massive sway for the general, kingdom work that is in the United States. And so there's a decline here. Sam, you've got some statistics, some ideas to wrap around that or maybe frame it out. What exactly are those?
Yeah, I mean, the decline of the mainline denominations has been documented really back to the 1970s. And Chad's going to be much more of an expert on this than I am, particularly with his own tribe, the UMC. And for the longest time, us Southern Baptists kind of, forgive me, Chad, I mean, seriously, forgive me, kind of looked down upon the UMC and kind of perhaps had some remarks that weren't too kind about you guys. As we thought we were growing and you were declining, and hey, look at us, we're better than you. And then all of a sudden, we went in decline, starting, late 90s. And we find ourselves in very similar situations now, maybe for different reasons, but certainly in similar situations. Chad, give us just a little, just give us a brief history, because I know a lot of our listeners come from mainline groups, but many also don't. So give us your perspective on the mainline decline and what that might mean for the future.
Yeah. So I think in some ways, you can make fun of me a little bit, but I was a Southern Baptist for the first 20 years of my life. I'm an SBC pastor's kid. So I grew up deeply in that spectrum. And that's kind of part of the ways I approach, revitalization too. I'm going to give some broad brushstrokes because, I'm United Methodist. So it's a little bit smaller there. And I know Louisiana really well. But when I first started investigating this professionally a couple of 3 years ago, there was a lot of people were wanting to attach theological reasons for this. And the more and more I dug into the research, because I was telling Joshua on our call, I've got over 100 years of individual church statistics from Louisiana in the bookshelf right there on paper. I went to the data and realized that it's a systemic issue because after COVID, that was kind of one interesting reset button that we were able to hit. You saw decline happen across the board. And then, we went through a church split a couple of years ago. What's so interesting was the Lewis Center for Church Leadership, which is a big research hub for the United Methodist and other mainline, they were looking at the United Methodist Church, pre-split and post-split, and we found it was like the same median-sized church of both those who left and those who stayed was 38. And so that kicked back.
38. So that's a number I have not. I want to stop you right there. That is a number that I have not heard because most of our research, Church Answers, shows that the median church size is somewhere around 65.
Yep. So
for the United Methodist in Louisiana, it would be
no. Well, in Louisiana, it's even worse than that. But the Lewis Center did all of this work for the entire denomination, and the median size in 23 was 38 people. So 70% of my annual conference is under 40 in attendance, and 90% is under 125. And so I realized, okay, this is a systemic issue. You can't attach it to problem pastors or problem churches or even a theological basis because everybody was declining rapidly. I think that one of the uniqueness parts about mainline decline, versus the free church, with your Baptists, your Assemblies of God, your non-denominational church structures, all that sort of thing, is I really do feel like the mainline church is still living in a level of Christendom with the expectation that, church people are going to have kids and all their kids are going to join the church and that church people know what to do. And we can just kind of keep on going and going and going. And there's reasons why I feel like we were able to keep that running really long, even though we were smaller. Goheen and Sheridan have that book, Becoming a Missionary Church. Have y'all seen that?
I have, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of critiques. It's that Leslie Newbegin school of church just became exceedingly inward focused. I feel like the mainline church is probably a little bit worse off than that, than the free church system. And so I just kind of chase that rabbit. I think also, some of the things with revitalization is it's really easy. And I'm appreciate Carl Vader's over the last few years talking about normal sized churches and that language of smaller churches. Even in the main line, for the longest time, our revitalization stuff was coming from the handful of massive churches we had in the United Methodist
really?
Church, which is great, which is cool. But like I've got one church in our entire annual conference that's over 600 in worship. And if all the folks talking about, make a healthy church, grow your church, but get healthy, are writing from the perspective of churches of 2,000 plus, like that's not going to be handy if your median-sized congregation, median-sized worship attendance is 38.
We've obviously got some more questions, but this is fascinating. I can even just tell by Sam's face, my own inward thoughts on this it is like stepping into something different. This is like, hey, we're using the same language, and there's some similarities. I'm curious, what's a revi look like in this unfree church? Because there's so much about revitalization.
Unfree.
Hey, I'm trying to frame it the way that I mean. There's so much about revitalization within the free church well, hold on a second. Listen, so much about revitalization in the way that we do it is you're convincing this congregation of a need, and you are flipping the script and you're going in a different direction. I can't imagine what that would look like or feel like in a setting where I am part of a conference, where I'm part of a board, where we're not fully autonomous. And so that's what I mean. Like, what does that look like?
Well, the good news is my position is not a rare position. And so there's folks, and I'm a good friend with the guy in the LBC, the Louisiana Baptist Convention, that kind of does my job in the LBC. There's people that are there for that, but they have direct access to me. There's also a direct access to significant funds that we have available that we've been deploying towards revitalization over the last few years. So much of what we've realized with that whole idea is that, most of these churches, the idea of vitality language, we broke it off into, there's actually probably 4 different phases. There's an unstable church, there's a stable church, there's a vital church, and there's a sustainable church. And we did a lot of work trying to get measurable indicators towards those different stages inside of a handful of core categories to help a church actually realize, oh, wow, this is where we are. We're really unstable in this area, but we're actually pretty vital in this area because, vitality does not exist on a linear spectrum. And so really it's coming and working. And a lot of it's just we've made stickers because my boss says this all the time, just block and tackle. A lot of this is, helping churches learn to do things that are fairly standard for church databases. How many churches do you know that don't have a database?
0, but if they don't, church teams is who they should call. It's a fantastic organization.
That's one of y'all sponsors. I've listened to that.
It is. We'll talk about church teams here
I
in
should
just a
just
second.
say that right there.
Go.churchteams.com.
Yeah.
I know
They're
0. How many do you got over there in your conference?
All right, so I got to jump in here. Chad. One, Lewis Center does really good work. So that's not a name that's often circulated in our tribe, but shout out to the Lewis Center. They do good research. So if you're not familiar with them, go get familiar with them. And I want to push in a little bit on some of your research, Chad, with you said, and I'm paraphrasing here a bit, that theology wasn't as much of a driver with the decline. Now, that's very counter to the current argument, particularly, dating back to the 70s with the theory of institutional strictness and some of the books that were written, conservative churches grow, liberal churches decline. These are things that were ingrained in my brain in seminary and in other places. Now, I've since been exposed to some other research through Chavez and others who have some different arguments, and they're very good arguments. But it sounds like you are making an argument from the position of biological growth. And what I mean by that is our churches got old and we stopped having babies, therefore we went into decline. Am I wrong?
So yes and no. You're not wrong. That statement is another one's broad brushstrokes. What we do know is at some point in time, and I've got a couple of dates, at least for Louisiana, I can say so, people quit coming back to church. And so, that idea of growth by simply biological multiplication is, I would not ascribe to that whatsoever at all. There was an assumption of we've always been here. We will always be here because our kids will come in after us, and then our grandkids will come in after us. We know from our data points that, something around 2007, 2008 in Louisiana, we started seeing a marked drop in children in formation groups and youth in formation groups, which is the data point that we review every single year. That assumption, people might have had that assumption, but that's not the case. And when I talk about it, it's the theological argument, because I remember when I was younger and I was at a private Baptist college studying ministry, reading and hearing the same things. When I pull into our numbers over the churches that have both declined rapidly, and I started this project before we started splitting, I could not find, there's known conservative churches in the United Methodist Church back then. There's known conservative pastors. There was known pastors all across the spectrum and churches all across the spectrum. What I could not find was any engagement data that said our conservative churches weathered COVID better. Our conservative churches are bouncing back faster. In fact, what's so funny was the church that bounced back the best from 2019 to 2022 in Louisiana was probably one of our most progressive churches. And that was pre-split. And so what I realized was, but where it kind of can circle back in the theology piece, I do believe is that there is a struggle point inside of modern mainline theology that it struggles to separate the idea of ministries of mercy and justice and the role of mission and evangelism. That is a theological hunch I have right now.
Okay. No,
I think it's not the theological conversation that most people would assume will be going on inside Mainline right now.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's more about mission than it is liberal conservative.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So I think that's a fair point. It's one that I would love to dive into a little more, but you and I are going to start geeking out way too much for our listeners.
Yeah, don't do that.
If we try to have a statistical debate in front of everybody.
Just in front of Josh. Don't do that.
He's glazed over already.
So how aware are people of this? So and by the way, when you're talking about the split, when you hear a Methodist talk about the split, us Baptists may not even know what's going on in your world. There's been a pretty large schism in the Methodist Church that has formed the global Methodist Church out of the United Methodist Church. It's pretty significant. In fact, It's one of the most significant things to happen in denominationalism in the last 100 years. So if you're not paying attention to that, you should. So I just want to reference that, Chad, just in case people are hearing you talk and wondering, what do you mean by this split? But let's get down to the church member level, right? So you've got this church of 40 people.
Yeah.
They're looking around. They know they're a church of 40 people. They know that. But what's the self-awareness level here?
So what I found in that is when I talk with these churches, they feel like they are in this horrible space and that they're doing all these wrong things and they feel really bad about themselves. And I'm like, well, 70% of our churches are under 40. Y'all are going through, a lot of these are in rural areas, I can give you 15 other churches that are going through the exact same thing you're going through. And when I tell them that, I see this big, huge sigh of relief because they have thought they are doing a bad job. And the pastors thought they were doing a bad job. And so I'll tell them, hey, you're not a small church. You're actually a normal church.
Where does that come from? Because that's true in most denominations, that normal-sized churches feel like they're small. And I know, here in the Metroplex, in the Dallas area Metroplex, we'll joke sometimes, some buddies of ours, a friend has a church of 750, and he's like, I'm just a small fry, insignificant. And I'm like, not even in just our denomination, across the board, you're a pretty large church, a good-sized church. So there's definitely some sort of perspective that's going on. But in these rural towns, They can't be like sitting next to a church of 2,000. So
No.
where do you think that comes in the general psyche?
I think Carl Vaders does a great job talking about that and desizing the church. I think that especially in South Louisiana, you had massive televangelists for a long time, and so they see that. They also have seen the decline of their community. We're talking about towns that have declined by 70% in the last 20 or 30 years, and so you've got this cultural bummed outness, I guess, that can happen. I think there's also, I did a big survey a few years ago, and I got like around 300 respondents, but I simply asked people based off of, do you go to church? Do you not go to church? And if you go to church, what denomination or tradition are you part in? What would you call a small church? What would you call a medium church? What would you call a large church? If the person was Baptist or in the free church, they typically kind of fell into the Tim Keller designations. It's like, oh, a church of 200 is a small church. But if you're in the Mainline or you're Roman Catholic, you're like, oh, a small church is 10 people. A large church is 120 people. And so there's so much cultural confusion that people have on their own. And so what we've seen over the last couple of years, Sam, is that they're starting to realize that this is systemic. It's not them doing something bad. Because 9 times out of 10, these churches are amazing. They just have not been able to adapt to the changes of the last 20 years.
So let's talk about the UMC and what makes it different when it comes to revitalization. And Josh touched on it earlier. I love the unfree designation because there's some truth to what you said, Josh. It's just not terminology that people,
I'm sorry you're unfree.
I don't think the UMC people are going around, yeah, we're the unfree church. I don't think that's language that they use. But you have a more of a hierarchical structure, right?
Yeah.
That's the nature of the UMC, to some degree Presbyterianism as well. A lot of people in the SBC, myself included, fear a creeping Presbyterianism into our tribe. So explain, and I'm not saying Presbyterians are bad or anything. I'm just saying we should operate differently.
Yeah.
For a lot of our free church people, explain how that looks in terms of like what makes it different, because you guys can appoint pastors in ways that like the free church can't.
Yeah, that's the only thing we can do. So a couple things. So the first thing I read this morning might be surprising to y'all. No United Methodist pastor is a member of their local church.
I did not know that.
Yep. So I'm an ordained elder, full connection, which means I've gone through the whole rigmarole, MDiv, whole 9 yards. But our local pastors, your local pastor is not a member of the church. They're a member of the annual conference. So like that right there is unique. Then, we were talking about it before we got on the call, like we get moved, we get appointed, and in different seasons, our appointment tenures, it's not odd for a pastor to move every 2 or 3 years. That got longer for a while, but now you're starting to see it shorten again. So, think about, how difficult it is for a pastor to know, I'm only being in this church for 3 years. And you think of like the life cycle of leadership that's there. Some would say that it takes 3 or 4 years for a church to actually fully trust you and let you be a pastor. You've got to hit the ground running, really. So that's big. We do have our polity, and we're appointed. And we have that structure. There's good sides to that, and there's bad sides to that. One of the good sides is, I can give a local church who's needing to deal with revitalization a lot more money than the association might be able to give them. And come in and grant funds, access that. Another thing, I think this is what's unique, is we're expensive. Like, United Methodist churches are just more expensive to run and maintain than like the Baptist church across the street. If you have a seminary trained pastor, there's a minimum compensation and there's mandatory insurance.
Use way more water.
Yeah, y'all do.
Like for baptism. So there's a cost benefit analysis on that one.
Yeah,
listen, Chad. Every time I hear like what some of my Presbyterian or Methodist buddies make, I'm like, you know what? I'm really tempted to go through their ordination process.
I had no idea until just now. This is something I'm going to Google later.
No, if the church wants a seminary trained pastor, they're going to have that. They're going to be expensive. So that's one of the unique structures that's there.
Interesting.
The second thing is per capita giving in United Methodist churches is really high. but we're more expensive to maintain, and we could run that. Like Sam, I was googling this yesterday. Like Sam, what's the average per capita giving that you would say?
And across the board, it's $30
Yeah.
weekly per capita giving. So that's
Yeah.
what each person gives, including children.
So I have never run a United Methodist church in Louisiana that has $30. Like I've run multiple churches that are in excess of $150 a week.
That's extraordinary. I mean,
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah, and we could
really high in the Baptist.
Yeah, and we could maintain that for the longest time. Like that wasn't an issue. We could maintain that for a longest time. So the crunch of the last 5 or 10 years has gotten super, super, super big. The other thing that with United Methodist is unique is, bivocational or co-vocational is kind of a rage, is all the rage right now. We have to talk about that. We've had part-time ministry and multiple church ministry attachments since the beginning of our structure. So it's not odd for a pastor to have 3 churches. I served a church, the last church I served, I was their part-time pastor, and I think it had been 90 years since they had not had to share a pastor with another church.
yeah, but that goes back to the days of Wesley when you guys
Exactly.
were
So it was a missional movement. Like we had the multiple point charge for a missional movement, and in the 1950s and 60s, you see it begin to be a way to keep costs down and to keep pastors in churches. And so you see this original, very mission-focused church planting. Like at one point in time, there was more United Methodist churches than post offices. We had this mechanism, and the movement went away, but we kept the mechanism alive. And so I think with that oftentimes, I mean, I don't know when a Baptist church now will start having conversations about when we might need to close. From my friends I've talked to, they say, well, normally a lot of times if they can't support a full-time pastor, they'll start having that conversation. I mean, we've got churches of 6 people paying a pastor $200 a month. And so that's one of those other unique pieces.
So I like to say that congregationalism works really well at the local church level and terribly at the national level. You guys are a little bit of the reverse.
Yeah, I'd agree to
we
that.
are. So you're able to provide funding. The institution is able to provide stability. And because of that, there is a higher per capita giving because they know where this money is going to go and what it's going to do. So there are benefits and deficiencies to both systems, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They're just very different systems. And, Chad, we're up against time. So this has been a fascinating conversation. And we're just going to have to bring you back on to talk more about, the mainline structure, how that works for church revitalization. Because I think a lot of our listeners, it's going to be very new information for them, but it's important because, man, I just want to get back to the days when the Baptists and the Methodists were like competing to plant churches out west. Like let's get back to the day where like there was this healthy gospel competition of like who can be the first to town, first Methodist or first Baptist, right? And then the Presbyterians would follow up later, right?
Well, and we shared buildings for a long time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, our church's history goes back to one building, the Church of Christ, the Baptist, the Methodist, and the Presbys, all in the same building. And but like Sam says, we're right up against it, and we really appreciate your time. We'll definitely have to have you back on. I learned a lot. I was really challenged by that. I even have some more questions, but we don't have time. Sam, tell them about church teams, though, before we sign off.
Yeah, I certainly want to tell everyone about church teams. Longtime sponsor. Thank you, Boyd Pelly and crew, for all that you do. You help churches, you serve churches. Church Teams has best-in-class customer service. They are often leading the way with technology, and their stuff's easy to use. So if you're a little intimidated by all this, don't be. Church Teams is the people to call. So if you have technology needs, systems, website, online giving, databases, workflow, they are definitely the ones to call. Go.churchteams.com. revitalizing.churchteams.com. Tell them we sent you. That way we get credit. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you, Chad, for being on the show. Thank you, listener, for listening. We hope that this conversation was encouraging to you. And if it was, make sure that you share the show. Let others know about what's going on here at Rainer on Leadership. And we will catch you